We'll get started here in just a minute. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We're happy that you were able to join us today in the new year. And if you could just throw into the chat, where are you joining us from? We'll see what kind of distribution we have for attendees. Oh, Amsterdam. So we're going strong off the top. Ohio, blizzard-bound Boston, of course. So
I can actually see my neighbor's windowsill now, though, so it's not as bad as it was the other day.
Sure.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like I've got January going on right now. 4 weeks ago, I had 4 feet of snow and 5 degrees, and now I'm looking at sun, and I think we're going to be 62. It's not good for our water year. Yeah, we got to. Oh, hey, Mark, Portland, Oregon, Hamburg. All right, a lot of Europe showing up. Serbia, Portugal,
Croatia. Wow.
Yeah, Ecuador. This is awesome. This is awesome. Welcome. If you're just joining us, we're just getting ready to get started, and we're just asking everybody where you're tuning in from today. Bulgaria, Scotland. Wow.
Yeah, no holiday sweater this time. Sorry, it was a seasonal thing. It is in my closet.
Outside.
You should do it all the time.
Okay, maybe it's a brand thing now. I don't know.
Don't they do that in Sweden all the time?
I haven't seen those sort of coats in Sweden other than the one time I wore it while I was in Sweden.
All right, we'll get started here in just a minute. Yes, a lot of Europe. I think this is the strongest Europe session that we've had. Then again, my brain could be cloudy, so there's always that chance. But want to welcome everybody to the Dynamo series in the new year. And we are going to be having some format changes pretty soon, but don't worry, the Dynamo series and a bunch of others will be going as normal. It's just how we explain what the community conversations are and how we manage them and how do we do more. And how do we get more speakers and what kind of topics you want, all that good stuff. So, all right, well, let's kick it off. Seems like a good time to do it. Community conversations provide opportunities for engineers, designers, artists, and makers to meet in a safe, live virtual setting to share expertise, get to know leaders in your field, and grow your community network. They're always supported by Autodesk community managers to help guide the conversation and feed insights back from the community to Autodesk and support participants in getting connected to the expertise you need. I will provide the links at the end for everybody for our community. The fun stuff, the rules. We could go to the next one, please. Lines are muted. We invite you to turn your camera on just to kind of give that virtual in-person feeling. I know it doesn't replace being in person. Hopefully, we get AU in person this year. It's still possible. If you have a question, either raise your hand and we'll call on you, and we'll unmute, or you can use the chat to type your question. We'll get to those if we can. In the bottom right, you see the little thumb thing. That's how you ask a question in Zoom, or like I said, the chat. The session will be recorded, and we'll send out a link to everybody who registered and showed up. And yeah, next, please. The really fun one. This is just basically distilled down into a quick sentence. The lawyers ask us that you don't make any purchasing decisions based on anything that's not in the shipping product today. So, any crazy things, we're talking about future, any products, make your decisions based on how the products are right now as you get them. Next, I am Sean Hurley. I'm your Autodesk Community Engagement Manager. I'm kind of a geeky technologist and unofficial Autodesk historian. Sunday, we hit 40 years of Autodesk, so 40th birthday. It has entered middle age. I am based in Sunny Bend, Oregon, so I'm glad to be here.
All right, and my name is Jacob Small. I'm designated support specialist. Actually, our title just changed today. I got to go back and change this. I am a technical account specialist as of actually 2 days back now. But I'm an absolute Dynamo forum junkie. You'll see me in the Dynamo forums at all hours of the day, based out of Boston, Massachusetts.
And hello everyone, my name is Sol. I'm the product manager for Dynamo. This is my job to guide the evolution of the product as we move forward into the future. I describe myself as a curious human being. I just like everything and all things and just want to jump in every direction at any point in time. Also based here in Boston, but originally from New Zealand, if you can't tell by the way I sound.
That is definitely a Boston accent.
I'm trying, right? I'm trying. Maybe not trying hard enough, but I'm trying. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a continuation of a Dynamo Office Hours series that we started over a year ago now. So this is session number 22. If this is the first time you're joining us and you're curious about what we've presented before, then please go and check out our previous links. There's on a forum post, there's a YouTube channel, and there's every community conversations page previous to these as well. They're around about an hour long, every one of them. So there's circa 21 hours of good stuff out there. Today, we're going to be looking at Dynamo inside a host. So last year, we covered mostly Dynamo core content. This was sort of out of the box experiences that you got in any flavor of Dynamo you had, be it Alias, or Civil 3D, or Revit, or FormIt, or anything. And this year, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of those specific flavors. So today, with Dynamo on a host, it's going to be a 20-minute presentation. This is going to cover sort of the more generic aspects of Dynamo and hosts working together. And we're going to do a little bit of a live demonstration from Jacob, so cue the danger music on that one. And then there's going to be time for Q&A at the end. But if you want to ask a question throughout the session, please do. We actually encourage it. It's the point of this series. It is a conversation, and we really do appreciate and like going down a few rabbit holes during the course of these presentations.
Absolutely.
All right, so we're going to do a bit of a flip-flop, Jacob and myself. So I'm starting with the first slide. So something to bear in mind with Dynamo is there's, while there are different flavors around, say, Dynamo working with Revit or Dynamo working with Civil 3D or other host softwares that we have, there's two sort of like technical flavors that fit in this space. There's either in-process Dynamo or out-of-process Dynamo. So in-process Dynamo that we have in our sort of Dynamo ecosystem today is Revit and Civil 3D. And what that means is Dynamo actually sits inside of that host application. So it lives inside of their memory space. In the case of Revit, this means Sandbox, which is multi-threaded, goes into a single threaded environment because it's working inside of the Revit idle thread and that Revit memory space. Well, that means it can sort of, because it lives within that realm, within that world, it can easily call the APIs of those in-process host products. So this is things like directly talking to the Revit API and being able to engage with the Revit API to do things inside of your Revit document, which is really cool. But it also does mean that it blocks host operation when Dynamo is executing. So you can only do one or the other in that kind of scenario. Then we also have flavors called out-of-process Dynamo. So this is where Dynamo does not live inside of that host memory space. So in essence, you have a Dynamo application and a host application, in this case, FormIt, robot structural analysis, Alias, or advanced steel, and they talk to each other via this thing we call like IPC, or inter-process communication. So basically the host will say, hey, Dynamo, I want something. It'll give it to Dynamo. Dynamo will do something and then give it back to the host, or vice versa. They are non-blocking operations in this case, which means that you can have something running and executing in Dynamo and still interface and react with your host environment at the same time. This also means you get the benefits of the core Dynamo sandbox experience, where you can have Dynamo executing on one thread, and you can have or make UI changes in the case of, say, moving nodes around or plugging wires in or adding notes or groups of things while that execution event is occurring, which is pretty awesome. So that is kind of like the flavors of in-process versus out-of-process Dynamo.
Cool. Thanks, Sol. Thanks, Sol. Now let's talk about where your stuff shows up, right? As we know, Dynamo has a library, and that's where you go to get your different functions, right? We talked about this all the way back in November of actually 2020, so way, way, way back when. But we want to take a quick snapshot of what the library actually looks like now that we're in kind of the integration menu. So what we see right here, that is our Dynamo core kind of content, right? That is the base level library, right? This stuff that I've put in the red box here, it's always going to be present in any flavor of Dynamo that you're in. It's always going to be consistent, which is really great. You also have the capability to add on additional packages through custom nodes and packages you can get through Dynamo's package manager and other sources to sort of expand on the capabilities of Dynamo, right? This is sort of a sandbox. It's going to be unique to every single system you'll ever use Dynamo on. And there are some limitations to that relative to the different integrations that we'll talk about here shortly. Now, this was in Dynamo's sandbox. When I opened Dynamo Revit, things change a little bit, right? Same thing with Civil 3D. They changed even further. So what you can see here, I've put those little icons up at the top so we can kind of tell which application is which as we sort of move through, because it can be tough to see on screen otherwise. But I've highlighted here the Dynamo core nodes in each of those libraries. So you can see the Revit library has those same functionalities sort of built in there. The Civil 3D library, again, the same functionalities. They're in a different order because we're sort of sorting alphabetically, is how they're sort of displayed on the Dynamo library area, but they're going to be different based on which integration you're in. So if you're looking for a particular piece of the library that usually shows under AutoCAD and you don't see the AutoCAD menu, it's likely because you're in the wrong integration. And that's exactly what this is pointing out. So these these orange boxes that we just put up there are highlighting those pieces of code that is unique to this Dynamo integration that we're in, right? We don't see the AutoCAD menu in Revit. We don't see the AutoCAD menu in Dynamo Sandbox. We still have the capability to put whatever add-ons we might like. In fact, you can see I've got one installed on this Revit instance when I took the screenshot, which was for the steel connections nodes, which are really cool for anybody who does any kind of structural work. But lots of changes in between the different parts and pieces. So it's important you understand kind of what those limits are. Now, within that context of the library, it's also important that we keep in mind how we manage our packages. A lot of your code can actually be reused between different Dynamo instances, right? So any sort of Dynamo core geometry library, you can move it using Dynamo Civil, Dynamo Revit, Dynamo Sandbox, Dynamo Alias, Dynamo FormIt, any Dynamo you might like, which is pretty cool. Now, there are some other pieces that you can make use of, like getting data from Excel files, loading OpenCV module into Python, and making use of a lot of other Python standard library content or standard Python packages that are not unique to an Autodesk integration. You can also sort of send and receive data from the web. All of that code can be reused, doesn't matter which instance of Dynamo you're in. But there is code that does require access to particular dependencies in order to be able to function. This would be content like interacting with your Revit model. So as Sol mentioned before, in order to interact with the Revit model or the Civil 3D model, we do run those as kind of in-process integrations, which means it has direct access to the API. Otherwise, there's no way to get to that content. And therefore, when you try and load that piece in, it's just going to fail because it's not going to see the core code base that it needs in order to do that project. Now, custom nodes and packages do get a little bit more complicated because we don't know what's in them, right? So we don't know whether or not something will work or not when you go to open up. So you may see sort of different results. And I'm going to go over a couple different examples of this today. The first option is failing to load entirely. This is an example. You can see that with the Archilab package in the Civil 3D toolkit. You can see that it might load, but it won't actually work, which we'll see with Clockwork. And you can also see stuff which will partly load thanks to the Rhythm package. Shout out to John Pearson, who I see is on the call, Conrad Soban for Archilab, and Paulo Serra for the Civil 3D toolkit. Oh, and Andreas Deichmann for Clockwork. All awesome Dynamo community members. Really, really happy to have you guys involved. So with that said, let's take a look at what actually happens. Again, we're going to go Sandbox on the left, Revit in the middle, and Civil 3D on the right. So you can see here, we've actually, first we'll highlight sort of the Archilab content and the Civil 3D toolkit content. In Revit, we can see Archilab. But if we look over in Sandbox, it's not there. If we look over in Civil 3D, it's not there. You can only work with that content in that particular integration because it needs to have access to those Revit DLLs, the Revit link libraries and dependencies that make up that application. Same thing with the Civil 3D toolkit over there on the right. It's listed as Autodesk within the library, and it does not show up in Sandbox or in Revit because there's just no way for it to access that content. Whoa. Not sure what happened there. Those were supposed to be there before. We'll continue on. Now, the next piece, and this is, again, shout out to John for the Rhythm package. You can see here, this is an example of a package that partially loads up. right? When I'm in Sandbox, I've got a bunch of stuff, even though it utilizes some of those Revit DLLs, and it's still showing up in my library. So I can make use of some of that content that doesn't need that core piece. And as John's putting in there, he's actually got multiple aspects to Rhythm that sort of load up, and Dynamo will sort of grab what it can, which is really, really awesome. Great feature of Rhythm, and it allows us to do stuff like send things to the clipboard, even though I might not be in a Revit instance, which is really cool. The last option is you can put the package in there, but it might not work. So we saw Clockwork was in all 3 instances. It looked like it was fine. And if I was to actually scroll through the library, it would all be there. But when I actually go to place the node on the canvas, you can see in the left in Dynamo Sandbox, the result of bounding box from Dynamo bounding box is going to return null, because it's trying to create a Revit element and it's got no access to those Revit libraries and the Revit files that it needs in order to create that content. Meanwhile, the Revit integration, it's running totally smooth. And then the Civil 3D, once again, it's not working all the way out, which is really great.
Awesome. Thanks, Jacob. That was a waterfall of stuff. So hopefully that landed, and thanks, John, for adding in some more context as to how Rhythm in particular deals with some of those intricacies. So you might have heard of these things called app data and program data. We've touched upon these in some of our previous sessions, but this is in essence where Dynamo goes to look for stuff. So app data / roaming is the default location where Windows stores all of your user content, and Dynamo leverages this location for definitions, logs, packages, and the Dynamo settings menu. So packages, things like the packages Jacob just talked about, so Rhythm and Clockwork and Archilab and Civil Toolkit. Definitions are your local definitions that you can create yourself and just save to that local location. Logs, if something goes wrong, someone like Jacob's going to ask you for a log, and this is where you find it. So simply type in percentage, app data percentage into your Windows bar, and it's going to take you to the roaming one by default, and you should be able to navigate down through Dynamo Core, and the version that you're working in to find it. And then Dynamo settings is the way in which Dynamo saves your chosen settings inside of the file. So if you want to have a particular resolution to your rendering, if you want to have a particular working range, or you want to have other sort of settings that are saved inside of your preferences, this is the place where Dynamo will go and look for them. So we had one bug, but we missed one singular item. You can go and actually modify this manually and it will still work because Dynamo still pulls that in the background, even if it is missing from the UI. So apologies on that one. And then program data is where applications can store data that doesn't require elevated machine permission. So a lot of what happens in security related work these days is around elevated permission. So this is when you have to log in with admin rights to be able to do pretty much most useful things. Program data is kind of like a less severe case where you can put stuff. And so Dynamo leverages this only in the Revit instance to date. And this is where Dynamo player sample files live. It's in quite a rabbit warren of different subfolders, but you can find the content there if you want to go and look for it.
All right, so now that we've talked over where stuff might live and sort of what those packages are, let's talk about our application-specific objects. What is the, my host stuff? Where does it live? So as we talked before, way back in session 1 or 2, actually, once again, a couple years back now, every single data type has some degree of limits to what you can do with it and some sort of capabilities, right? So if I wanted to have a nice tasty orange, Sol could take that orange and he could have a nice tasty little snack. But if I'm looking for that tasty snack and Sean gets the number 16, Sean's going hungry because he can't eat the number 16, right? There are some limits to what you can do with things. Conversely, if I wanted to take the square root of something, well, Sol can't take the square root of orange. It just doesn't work. Try as he might. Meanwhile, Sean can absolutely come back with the answer 4, which is, I think, correct. It's been a while since I've checked my calculator, though. So while you can sort of take advantage of those different types, there are limits to what you can do with them. So every application that wants to do different type of stuff needs its own data type so that it can modify those things. These are things like the Revit elements, the things that we put into our RVT files or RFA files, the Civil 3D or AutoCAD objects that populate our DWGs, the FormIt or alias geometry, your robot and that analytical nodes and stuff like that. All of that content all has to sort of live in some sort of structured way that the computer can manipulate. And this is where our Dynamo specific application objects come in. Now, new nodes are required for each one of those data types, which is in fact why we get those new sections of the library, because Dynamo core doesn't necessarily know what a Revit object is, nor how to work with it. So the best way to sort of identify, do I have the right type of data, is with the object.type node. And again, you can go back and check out the previous recordings from the community conversations to learn a little bit more about data types and what you can do with them.
Awesome, thanks, Jacob. So also we have this notion of like, how do some of these nodes that Jacob touched upon earlier from specifically a host show up in different hosts? So when they're in the wrong place, what do they look like? And that's what you can see here on screen. So we've got two different versions on screen right now. We have the upper, more yellow version, which is what exists in Dynamo from the 2.12 version backwards into antiquity. And this is going to surface as what we call a dummy node. So a dummy node has no like functional content inside. It's mostly a UI rendering, which has some dummy ports, and its purpose in essence is to tell you that you're missing something and to make sure that your wires are not disconnected. So you don't have to go and reconnect those when you actually do load that correct content. So we call this unresolved. There's an unresolved state for nodes, and host content will show up or when you're not in the host, content from a host is going to show up in this unresolved state. On the lower right hand, this is the refresh, the visual refresh we've done to Dynamo for the version of 2.13 onwards, currently only available in Sandbox, but coming to your favorite host in the not too distant future. And this is using the same nomenclature, but it's now expressing it in a slightly different visual way. So the shattered pin, if you will, is now the new unresolved node state. So dummy nodes don't truly exist. They don't work. They're not going to return anything, not going to return any data. They're not even going to give you anything to work with whatsoever. They're simply there as an essence, a pin to retain your connectors and a sort of a message or a sign, if you will, to go and either open that graph back inside of a host content or deal with that data in a slightly different way, which we'll touch upon later.
All right, the next thing to know about, because we've got these different data types, it's important to know that we can reuse graphs across different host applications and sort of flavors of Dynamo, if you will. So the way this basically works is if your sort of host reliant nodes produce the content, you can basically modify that graph, set that graph up, and put in the application specific pieces into the context to make it work. So you can see here, I'm currently looking, or I currently have on screen an instance of Dynamo Sandbox, which is actually just sort of showing, creating hello, Sean, soul, and world as one little sentence, spelled out with lines through points, which was a lot of work to do. And I wouldn't want to have to sort of rebuild that graph for every possible instance, because I had to figure out where each one of those points went by typing an XY coordinate, right? Do not recommend this method of getting work done, by the way. There are much better ways to make text. But that said, I can then take that content and use that to drive Revit content and create model lines for that text, or lines in AutoCAD for that text, whatever it may be, by just letting the graph run. And you'll see we've got those unresolved nodes because they're in a dummy state. The warning doesn't necessarily surface and sort of block any execution, because we're in sort of two parallel tracks where one train's just not going to run because we've sort of thrown that switch, which can be really, really useful when you're trying to sort of make use of that content that you might have without having to sort of reinvent the wheel.
And so if we're talking about moving stuff between things, typically this is usually geometry or data. But when you specifically want to map or move a geometry between different things, like what happens when it's created in a different way? So there's a few gotchas inside of hosts. Things like geometry may come from different places, or can come from many different places, but may not be compatible. We sort of touched upon this earlier. For example, things might be called mesh as sort of like a macro name, but a mesh coming in from Dynamo Sandbox and a mesh toolkit mesh are actually different meshes. So they require a translation to happen for them to actually work together. So if you see on screen, we have this cool rabbit sitting in a funky pose. We're importing this mesh from an OBJ file, and this is coming in using the mesh toolkit. So you'll notice under the first node on the left, upper quadrant. We have autodesk.dynamo.mesh toolkit.mesh, so it's a specific typology of mesh. And then we can convert that to just an out-of-the-box Dynamo mesh. And so there's a really cool package called Spring. So shout out to Dimit Vinkov on that one. And he has created some conversions to allow you to switch between Mesh Toolkit and the out-of-the-box meshes. So this node here will simply do that, which is really nice. And then it showcases that the object type for that one is now autodesk.designscript.geometry.mesh. So both of them are meshes at the sort of the tail end of that class tree, but they are different at the higher up, which means the mesh content or the functions that work on mesh are not going to behave on both of them. They're simply going to fail if they're not going to recognize the exact mesh typology. But there's different ways that you can translate between things. So like the type translation can happen, such as the node that Dimitar has, which is awesome. You can also sort of default to some common object types or patterns, such as SAT files, OBJ files, or STL files. Dynamo enables you to export some of these out of the box, which is cool, and packages can extend that functionality. You can also use this notion of serialization. And so serialization is the converting that geometry into a string format. So out of the box, we have a couple of different nodes here, serialized as SAB or deserialized as SAB. So you can have one is basically taking geometry in, converting it to a string, you can save it on disk somewhere. And the other one is reading that string in and then converting it back to geometry. And then the generative design package also has a data.remember node, which is really useful for, in essence, serializing geometry into the Dynamo graph itself. It has to be sort of base geometry that Dynamo recognizes, so you can't serialize things like Revit walls or Revit doors and you get that data, the parameter data from it. But you can get sort of base surfaces and lines and points and cuboids and any kind of geometry, which is really nice to work with. So it's really useful as a way to sort of gate that transition or be a bridge between those two places.
So there's one other mechanism that's sort of important to know about sort of moving data between things, and that's marshalling, right? What sort of has to happen under the hood when I want to go from a Revit line to a Dynamo line, or from a Dynamo line to a Civil 3D line, or any other sort of type of thing in between. And there are two different ways that this can happen. It's actually, one of them is a form of serialization, like Sol just mentioned, where we're basically going to take the thing, convert it into something that Dynamo stores, and then just break the connection, let it sit on inside of Dynamo. If we want to sort of reinitiate that connection, we'll just go back to the well that was our host application, pull that data back over and update and rerun the entire graph. The other way that this happens is through marshalling. We mentioned marshalling back in, I think it was number 20, how to make Dynamo sing, where we talked about speed. Marshalling, it's the process of sort of accessing data from one application inside of another application. This takes time, i.e. this is, the example of a Dynamo line showing up as a Revit line element where we actually see that geometry and keeping those things back and forth so that if I manipulate the element in Dynamo, it's actually going to manipulate that content in Revit. One way I like to think of this is as if we were having a conversation. So let's take me, let's make that me. We'll put the beard and the crazy hair on there. And now that we're me, we can start thinking about introducing ourselves in a few different languages. So we'll start with Swedish. Hey, jag heter Jacob, right? That works. We've just introduced myself to anybody who's using the Swedish application as their core language unit. Hola, me llamo Jacob. I've now introduced myself to anybody who might speak Spanish as their primary language. This one, I actually have to look at here, the pronunciation, Privet min ya zovut Jacob. I hope I got that right. That was supposed to be Russian. Thumbs up, thumbs down. If I did okay with it, feel free to tell me no. But that was the hope there. And then, English. Hello, my name is Jacob. All of these, it's conveying the exact same core idea, this exact same object of my introduction, right? It's just speaking a different language to do that typical thing, or that same thing. And if I want to sort of communicate with that application, with that individual, I have to speak that language, which is where that translation comes in. So marshalling is going to allow us to sort of keep that same piece and sort of manipulate it in all of the languages, whereas serialization is just going to say, okay, we've taken the concept, we've got what we need, let's put that other back in. Now, it's important that you only marshal or serialize the data that you need, because otherwise you could wind up with all this extra data. And every time you have to sort of bounce back and forth, it's actually going to slow down your computer, right? So you want to sort of reduce that data set that has to bounce around as much as possible in order to get the best performance from your Dynamo graphs.
Awesome. And now let's talk about maybe a slightly different tangent where hosts come in slightly different flavors. So here we talk about Dynamo is actually a host to Python in this kind of environment. So Python is a giant world of awesomeness. You can do many great things. And so Dynamo wants to leverage that. And what we do is we become a host for Python, and we have to talk about how to marshal information between them. So in this case, we're talking about the translation of data from certain typologies into Python and from Python backwards. And we have an execution of the Python VM giving us that returned information that needs to talk in tandem with the design scope VM inside of Dynamo. So when Dynamo is hosted inside of application, Dynamo can also be a host of things like Python, which is really cool. And that allows interoperation between Dynamo or the world of .NET and C# and Python via these things called interfaces. So what base types of things can transfer pretty easily. So we're talking about like dictionaries and strings and integers and so on. And that's what you'll see on screen here, which is a representation of the nodes and how they look in Dynamo 2.13, which is upcoming or in Sandbox today. And this means that you can marshal between these different ones pretty seamlessly. So Python has its own version of dictionaries, Dynamo has its own version of dictionaries, and at the interface between those two worlds, we make sure that data seamlessly transfers between them. So here we have some Dynamo dictionaries being created talking about salted butter, burnt toast, and strawberry jam. And we simply want to add orange juice into that mix. And we can do so inside of Python and return that back into the world of Dynamo, which is pretty awesome. And then if you want to get a little bit more meta at the high level, then the world of .NET also hosts Dynamo as well. And you can start abstracting in many different directions beyond that. It's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, it gets pretty complex because .NET's hosting Revit, which is hosting Dynamo, which is hosting Python, which is calling back to .NET, forming a nice little loop. But it's some really sort of interesting connections once you really start to break it down. All right, so let's cue up the danger music. We're gonna get started with the live demo, and we always joke about the danger music when we start these. Legit danger music this time. I'm currently have the PowerPoint that we're hosting, Dynamo Sandbox, Revit, Civil 3D, Alias, and then I'm going to spin up a Dynamo instance for each one of those host applications as well, all concurrently, and we're going to build a graph from scratch on one end and come out the other end in each of those applications, starting in Sandbox. So pardon me while I hit Alt-Tab 7 or 8 times. We're going to go ahead and we're going to start with a brand new file. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to actually start with another integration. We're going to take some data from Excel. To do that, I have to start with a file path. And we need to go to the right path. So let's go ahead and, yep, that is the right location. There's my data. And this is going to open up once I create a file from that path and then wire that into Excel imports. Whoop, that was export. There we go. We need the sheet name, which is a string data type. I put everything on sheet 1. I love that John's getting super technical about the way he's got rhythm pulled in there. That's awesome. And then notice when I wired in that sheet 1, because I'm in automatic run mode, down here, Excel's like screaming at me and flashing because I've actually opened up that Excel spreadsheet. It wasn't there before. We wired in the connection and this popped open. You can see this is all the data that I'm going to be bringing over into my host applications. So you can see I've got a bunch of X location, a bunch of Y locations, and a bunch of Z locations all right there. Then we've got our object that this is all related to, and then a comment. What this is this is punch list data that I just magically pulled from special nerdy stuff out onto my actual Excel file here so that we can start to manipulate that content and leverage that content. I am going to put a true false node here because I don't want to have to spin up and show Excel every single time this runs. And this has now been pulled over. And you can see that same content. But one thing to note, this is reading the horizontal row one at a time. And that's not the order I necessarily want my data in. Before I go ahead and transpose it though, I'm going to use the list.deconstruct node. I always use this node when I'm doing content with Excel because I take that first row and I put a watch node on there. And now I know what every one of my column data locations is. So now I can do a transpose. And this is going to take my rows, turn them into columns, my columns turning into rows. We talked about this way back when we talked bug functions on the list. And now you can see, as opposed to having my rows listed out, I've got all my X values, followed by all my Y values, followed by all my Z values, followed by all of my object names, followed by all of my comments. And all of that content is put together there. And now I can sort of understand which of those indices has the data that I'm after. So if I want to be able to sort of figure out where in my project these individual pieces are, we probably need to be able to create a point, which is XYZ data. And then I also need to find that XYZ. So we're going to use a code block here. We're going to find the variable A and say from the variable A, get me index 0. We'll wire that in. And here's just my X data, right? Well, we also want my Y data and my Z data. XYZ, there we go. Wire this in, and oh, we've got a warning. What's this state? Geometry working range. All right, so this is something that comes up periodically. Sometimes this is the right thing to do. Sometimes it is not, depending on what your host is. I'm going to go up into my settings and change my geometry scaling here to large in this case, because this is the right thing to do. And notice the warning has now gone away. Everything is happy. And as I'm wiring these in, we're starting to see some points. So the reason that this is a problem for me is I'm currently measuring in millimeters, which puts things pretty far out there. Let's go ahead and look at what that content is. And there's a lot there, right? Now, because I've got points, we can't necessarily host a point in Revit and some of our other applications. So I'm going to create a sphere through center point and radius. And we're just going to leave this down at the origin. If you ever get lost in a big data set like this, you need to find a piece of geometry. If you highlight it, go to your geometry background preview and then zoom to fit, it's going to bring you to where that is, which is really, really handy and quite helpful. We need to set a radius on this, and let's see if that radius makes sense. So that is a 1 millimeter sphere. That's probably too tiny. Let's go ahead and bump that up to 75 millimeters. Maybe that's right. Yeah, that seems like that might sort of be visible. It might not be too overwhelming. And then we're good to go. So now I'm going to save this graph, calling it live demo. I'm going to leave that open because, again, we've queued up the danger music. We're popping over to Revit. From here, I'm going to go into launch Dynamo for Revit. The way we do this is click on the Manage tab, and then we go into Dynamo. Takes a minute to spin up because it's spinning up Dynamo just like it would as if it was in Sandbox, but it's got the added sort of intricacy of it's got to pull open all those connections into Revit and open up all those DLLs that it needs in order to do its thing. Everybody probably, if you're familiar with Revit, you probably recognize this project, but in case you don't, this is the basic sample project. And we are going to pull open our project browser, look under generic models for some magic we're going to show here shortly. And then I'm going to zoom in on this area in our 3D view. So I'm always going to have Revit on the right side of the screen and Dynamo on the left when we're talking about Revit. All right, so I'm now going to go ahead and I'm going to open the live demo file, which I'm in the wrong location. Let's go to that location. There we go. Windows V to get that handy little shortcut of everything that's been in my clipboard history, which is pretty handy. And then I'm going to just open up that live demo. Again, it's the same file that we saw back here in Sandbox, which I'm going to leave Sandbox filling the entire screen. So we've got our sphere, we've got everything else. I'm going to go ahead and hit run. And then I'm going to do a real quick file save as, because while we want to live dangerously here, I want to be careful too. We're going to save this as Revit. So we're in a different file now. And now I want to start to figure out how could I make a new family type. So we're going to do a family type by geometry node. And this takes an input of a solid geometry, a name. I'm going to call this punch list point. Category. So we need to choose what we want to file this under. We're going to search for categories. There it is. Place this as, for now, just a generic model. Needs a family template. The easiest way to get a family template, if you ever need to find a path and you're in Revit, just go File, New, Family, and then navigate to the family template you want to use. Hold down Shift on our keyboard and right-click, copy as path, hit cancel, string node, and then paste. And that's going to take me right to that path for the family template. That works in any application. It's not unique to Revit or Civil 3D or anything like that. So handy little Windows tip for anybody. We then need a material and a subcategory. I'm going to start with the subcategory. I'm going to call the subcategory punch list data so that I can turn this stuff off and on if I don't want to see it in some of my other views. And now we need a material. We're going to do a material by name node. This node takes an input of a name and an output of a material. Our name is going to be default. Now, when I run this and wire it up, it's going to make a new family type. No instances, but we should see something in here called punch list point. There we go. Now it's time to make our family instances. So we've got a node called family instance by point. Again, this is an out of the box node. We'll take our family type as our first input, our point as our second input, and then I'm going to hit run, and we can watch in 3D space as new content's added to the model. Right, that happened real quick, right? We can hit undo and put that stuff back if we wanted, but let's go a step further. Let's take one of these family points and let's check out its properties. We don't have a comment on it. We just know that there's a problem here. It'd be better if we could, I don't know, set the parameter. Whoop. Set parameter by name for these elements, the name comments. Spelling matters here. And then values. And if we think all the way back here, I had my comment right there at index 4. So let's take this data and go to index 4. We'll wire this in, hit run once more, and then watch that comments field. Flashing is exposed, right? And we can do this, we can go through and we can look at every single punch list point. If I go to wireframe, we can really start to see this stuff. Crack in the plaster, turbines rusting, whatever it may be. It's all just a matter of doing that initial data gather, right? There's paint touch-ups and everything else. You know, it looks like there's a stain on the floor, whatever the content may be, paint touch-ups all throughout the model. And this, because it's a native Revit element, I can now schedule it. I can now assign it to somebody. I can now keep track of it inside my model environment, which is pretty nice. All right, so we're going to save live Revit and we're going to bounce now over to Civil 3D. We're keeping everything else open just in the name of time. So you can see this project probably looks pretty familiar, right? Hopefully we're going to see exactly the same thing once I wrap this up. So once again, to get to Dynamo within our integration, we're going to go into the Manage tab of Civil 3D, and then we are going to launch Dynamo. Takes a minute to load this up. The graphics is a little bit strained at this point. I don't know if anybody saw how difficult it was for us to keep that content kind of running. We'll glance at the chat. There are a lot more issues than just what I pointed out in the sample project, David. It's got some construction concerns. We'll put it that way for now. So back in Civil 3D, I'm going to pull this off. When I'm in Civil 3D, we're going to keep Civil 3D on the left, Dynamo on the right, Revit on the right, Dynamo on the left for Dynamo Revit, and Sandbox fills the whole screen, right? I'm once again going to go in here and say open, and we are going to navigate to the correct folder. That is not the correct folder. Windows paste. This is the correct folder. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that because that's going to be the next thing I need. And a live demo, open it up. Right where I left it off in Sandbox, no changes there. We're going to go File, Save As, live demo -civil. And now we've got a few hoops to jump through in order to get this content, because I don't have a block reference by geometry natively, or sorry, block by geometry. We've got block reference by geometry, which is actually in the Civil 3D toolkit. And I always have to dig to find this because I can never remember what the name of it is. Block reference extension, or is it block extension?
Joys of live demo.
Yeah. The coordinate system.
The prime opportunity for any Civil 3D user. Shout out in chat if you know what Jacob's looking for.
Civil toolkit. It's under AutoCAD. Block reference extension. Am I in the wrong Civil 3D? Objects, block reference. All right. I'm gonna cheat and we're gonna have a peek at how I built this before opening up the live wrong file, opening up the civil demo, and block reference extensions by geometry. It is there. All right. We'll close that out. And now I'm going to just go back to the live demo. All right. So similar to how we had to make the family type, we need to make our block reference. This is the actual piece that we would insert if we went into the insert tab. So we're going to place our geometry first. It then needs a location. I'm going to use the identity coordinate system, the global coordinate system, to just place one at the origin because there's no block by geometry. We have to sort of create the reference first. It needs a name. We'll use a string node for that. Just like before, punch this point. And then this is ready to run. I'm going to put this on a layer though. For now, we'll just put it on layer 0. Actually, no, put it on punch this point as the layer, just to show that we've made some changes here. And then it needs the block that we want to host it in. In this case, we can leave it null because this custom node does take care of that for us. We'll use existing as false, and we'll use append as true as well. I'm going to hold down tab to grab this entire chain to give myself a little bit more room. And then we'll hit run. And when I do this, if we pull open our layer manager, we should see, there we go. Punch list point has now been added into my list of layers. All right, so now with that, we've made our block reference. We do have a physical block at the internal origin. We don't necessarily want that though. We just want the block type. So I'm going to define a list of A and B. And then I'm going to take A out of that list. And what B is going to be, A is going to be my block reference. B is going to be our block reference block. So this is the block that is put in place by the block reference by geometry node. And then I'm going to use an object.delete node to remove that from the project. I still have the block reference, so we can reuse this though, which is the important bit. Nothing was voided out there, and this still has my block, so I am good to go. We can now create a block reference by coordinate system. Here's our source block. We need a coordinate system. Helps if I spell this right. SYSTEM by origin. I can't spell today. We'll just grab it the manual way. It's under geometry, abstract, coordinate system by origin. Origin, there we go. It needs a layer that it wants to place on. We're going to use that same layer we used before. Punch this points. And it needs a block because in Civil 3D and AutoCAD, we could place it in model space. We could place it in a paper space if we wanted to. To get the model space, there is a model space node, which requires a document input. And there is a current document node, which looks like that. And all of my punch list points have now been added into the project. All right, so now we have to start to add our parameters to this. Okay, the way we're going to do that, we need a object.add property set node. There we go. This takes the block objects, and now we need a property set name. The name I have is, I can never remember what I set this up as. Rename, copy, paste. There we go. 10 minutes left. I can see lots of action was happening in the chat. Feel free to keep it up. We've now attached the property set to there. Now, the next thing that we have to do is we have to update the property, which takes the object, the name of the property set, which we have here, the property name, which is comments, just like before, and then the property value. And once again, I'm asking Excel to give me that data. Index 4, wire this in, and say go. So now when I select one of these pieces, and then go into, sorry, clicked the wrong thing there, extended data, scuff marks, uh-oh, that's not great. This one I think said flashing exposed for one of the ones that was up here on the roof before, not that I can see it because it's buried behind the wall. Flashing exposed, and what was it, the rust on the turbine? Turbine rusting, right? So you can see the same content is reusable. All right, last 2 minutes of demo here. We're popping over to Alias. Alias is unique, and it's the first one that we're going to show off today that runs completely out of process. It's also unique in that I'm not going to bring the Revit sample model over into Alias. Sorry, it's just asking too much of my system all at once. I did try, it didn't go well. All right, so from here, we're in our file. First thing I need to do is I need to launch the Dynamo extension, which in Alias is under the transform palette. Now from here, I'm going to go ahead and say open. And we're going to go back to that path that I have in my clipboard. Live demo, open. And then right away, we'll do our save as. And now with Alias, there's not really data. It's all about form. So things are going to be a little bit different here. What I want to do is I want to be able to sort of place these spheres as individual pieces, and then we're going to bring the surfaces, all the spheres over into Alias. So to do that, I'm going to take my original sphere and need to transform it. From my geometry to a coordinate system. Right? I'm going to go ahead and hit run, loads up the Excel data. Now I have a point, but I need a coordinate system. There we go. And now instead of points, I have spheres at all those locations. And now I can send to Alias. And this is a really great node. We're going to pull Alias to the left and down. What I like about this node is when I hit run, if I've got a really complex surface, you get that little bar and it lets you know that stuff's happening, even though you might not actually see it, which is pretty cool. And then over here in Alias, I can never remember how to navigate. There it is. You can see all of those spheres have been pushed over. Now, again, there's not really a great way to move over the information associated to them about this was a scuff mark, this was an exposed flashing, et cetera, et cetera. And you can tell I'm operating at a very different scale than Alias wants me to, based on the amount of time it's taking me to scroll around there. But the content all got moved over. So we've effectively shown that you can reuse that same graph, move things around, and not have your system blow up in the middle of a Zoom webinar. So yeah, my Alt tab menu has way more than I'd like to present with at any given moment at this time. So hopefully you guys got some good tips out of that. And I know Sol has been doing a great job of answering questions from the chat. Is there anything we want to surface, Sol?
I think we've answered most of them. And apologies to everyone that we ran up on time on this one. If you do have any further questions, please feel free to post them in the community conversations link that you signed up for this from. We'll be able to answer those questions there and then come armed with them next time too. We should have a shorter demo next time maybe. But thank you all for coming. We have a couple more slides left before we tail off. So the last slide from my side before I hand it back to Sian is that we do run these sessions every 2 weeks on Thursday at 1 p.m. And these are, sorry, Jacob, can you go back? Thank you. We have 3 upcoming sessions. So this one was sort of more focused around like a generic host to Dynamo kind of relationship. The next one we're going to talk about is building with Dynamo. So this is going to be the first one in our Dynamo and Revit specific series. The next one after that on 3rd of March is getting civil with Dynamo, which will be the first one in our Dynamo and civil specific series. And then on March the 17th, the host of the Dynamo party is all of the other flavors that are sort of the out of process flavors of Dynamo, which is going to be the introduction to those. So think FormIt, Alias, Robot Structural Analysis, and Advanced Steel. And then there's a lot more to come. So once again, the focus of this year is going to be around hosts and also generative design later in the year too. So please do come and join us. We love having you all here. We hope you got something out of this and hope to see you next time.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And for all those that were rooting for Jacob to go down in a big crash, sorry to disappoint. After I crashed Zoom in a community conversation last week, I did want to have Jacob join me in that nice little club. But we're going to wrap up with some ways to stay connected to the Autodesk community. And I also wanted to call it, let me give you the links here. So there's a link to this session. There's a link to the Autodesk community. Let's go to that next slide and I'll just go through these. You can explore the many ways to connect to the Autodesk community, including the global network of user groups, the Autodesk Group Network, our industry-focused communities, helping your colleagues solve business challenges together, the Autodesk forums, of course, and then, of course, there's the Dynamo forums, which are a little separate island of their own, speaking of islands, and then staying connected with us on Twitter, Facebook, and all that. We've got a community journal, which is the Autodesk community team that talks about things like community conversations and different programs we have going on. We also have another new blog I'm putting in the links now called Autodesk Community Voices. And that is by Autodesk community members such as yourself talking to the community. So it's by the community for the community. This is all different topics. If you'd like to be an author in that, this is not by Autodesk. This is by end users, members of the community. We'd love to have some Dynamo blogs in there. Simple, easy tips, tricks, concepts, all that good stuff. Things you learned from Jacob, things you learned not to do from Jacob, all that good stuff. So those are the links. Again, thank you for attending. And we hope to see you again in the next Autodesk community conversations. The Dynamo ones that Sol showed, those are on the calendar for community conversations now. So go ahead and sign up for those now while it's at top of mind. So again, thank you for attending, and we hope to see you in the next community conversation. Thank you, everybody.